listeners, and welcome back to the Soft Landing Podcast, a gentle space for self-discovery. This week, we're discussing the F in Friends. That's fun, people. Get your minds out of the gutter. Or stay there. I'll come join you. Anyways, we're talking about being homies, lovers, and friends, and how to navigate these waters. We are joined this week by Kaya Spicer. She is a licensed clinical social worker and certified sex therapist. As someone with deep connections to service members, Kaya is honored to work with all veterans, including LGBTQIA+ service members, and they are certified as a mind-body medicine practitioner. Also, as an AASECT certified sex therapist, Kaya has a special interest in couples new to ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, BDSM kink, and healing after ending relationships, as well as psychedelic-assisted therapies and plant medicine as a tool in erotic wellness. Welcome to the pod, Kaya.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome.
Oh, for sure.
It's good to be here.
And we're glad to have you here. So to start off, we're doing our little segment, Eric's Inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask y'all, what is your favorite or maybe the most interesting term that you've heard for sex with friends? I can start while y'all are pondering.
Okay.
So I am someone who loves listening to podcasts. And I was listening to one of my regulars, and they mentioned this term that I had never heard of, and it tickled me pink. Friend cest. It was this is not the first time that I've heard something of like thing incest, but it was just such a like it just
kind
really
took you off guard a little bit.
It
Like, you weren't
did.
expecting that.
It did.
Okay.
I was just like
Friend.
So,
friend cest.
what does the sex part mean? Did you get that?
So I think it's just like having sex with friends, and it's like that because like that idea of when you're in like groups of people and like, oh, it's turning incestuous because everyone's sleeping with everyone. I think it was turning that kind of idea into one word, which is friend cest.
Right.
And again, I had never heard that before, and it definitely threw me for a loop. But I thought as I was preparing for this, I was like, oh, light bulb.
Yeah, well, that is definitely a new term for me as well.
Yes.
I think that, I'm a little bit not as up to date on what's going on because I was just thinking like, I don't know, fuck buddy, friends with
Right.
benefits, something along those lines was coming to mind. But Princess is a new one.
It is.
I don't think I could claim that one personally.
Oh, I wouldn't either, but I thought it was interesting to put to the space.
I'm with you, Rafaela. I'm just like, fuck buddy is good. Friends with benefit. I like friends with benefits, heavy on the friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard something new because I'm not hip with the lingo, right? But I've heard my sheesh. And I don't really know, but I kind of like it.
Break
right?
it down for us. You have more information on that?
So I think it's like a friend session, but we're doing a session. So it's like my sheesh.
Okay.
It's super new. I just heard it, but I was like,
Interesting.
I like it.
Okay, so it's like a play on the word, like instead of like I'm going to go have a sesh with my friend, but
Friend.
interesting. Okay.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Kind
And
of low
something
key.
between the sheets too. So
But yeah.
Yeah.
My sheesh.
That one is definitely more chill.
A session
than
in
one
the
that I shared.
sheets. A friend session in the sheets. My sheesh.
Yeah.
my sheesh. Yeah.
Okay, I
So I'm gonna
can
go meet up with my sheesh.
Okay.
So you feeling that one a little bit more?
Yeah, I like it. It's cute. It's giving. It's giving something. I like
Yeah.
it. We're gonna make it a thing.
I like
Yes, let's make it a thing.
Well, thank y'all for indulging me in that and
always.
for teaching me a new word. I love it. And also for me to teach y'all a new word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always new things coming out when
There
it comes to
is.
sex and relationship
Yeah.
terminology, just as culture shifts and advances. And, we have the power of redefining language all the time. So I think it's a really cool thing, even though, like I said, it's not a word for me.
Right.
But I'm glad that someone is finding it useful and that their community and culture knows what it
Yes.
means.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. And fuck buddy, it's never gonna get old for me.
Never.
We're going to be direct and clear
Yes,
what's happening.
exactly. That's probably my favorite. If I had to pick the favorite over the interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So now, Kaya, would love to give you the opportunity to share with us a bit about your work and kind of your frame of reference in terms of this conversation around sex and friends.
Thanks for that intro. My work is primarily with different relationship orientations. So whether that's dyadic, whether that's couples, threesomes, foursomes, moresomes, like I like to say,
Mm-hmm.
and really helping folks navigate that space, right? Whether that's platonic romantic relationship, platonic sexual relationship, just a sexual relationship, all those formations matter. And
Mm-hmm.
so really my work is helping folks navigate that through kind of a lens, like you said, of decolonizing mental health, decolonizing the way that we approach sex, gender, and our bodies, right? I think that's a really big part of it. So I love it. I love the work that I do. It's really close to my heart because I think that we're, you know, a really shame-based society when it comes to sex and how we're
Mhm.
introduced to sex. So really focusing on decolonizing that, meaning like changing the way that our mind and our framework around that shame narrative and unpacking that, deconstructing that, and getting into our pleasure and getting into our love,
Mm-hmm.
right? Regardless of what that looks like.
I love that
Yeah.
beautiful
So that's
reminder and approach because sometimes it feels like we can be very transactional in our relationships, be them
Mhm.
romantic, sexual, with partners or family members, friends, employees, employers. And I think it's really important for us to redefine, reclaim, and decolonize, what this could look like for all of us in a way that is a lot more equitable and pleasurable for all that's involved. So I love that you are reminding people that therapy can be for so many different dynamics, not
Mhm.
just traditional marriage counseling, if you will.
yeah, and not just for, pathology, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, it's not just for that either. It can be to help you navigate communication or introducing how do you talk to your partner about a new kink that you're interested in. So, it's not just from that state of, pathology either, even though
Yeah.
that's a part of it.
One
Mm-hmm.
second. Yeah. So, just to help us do some ground setting, we'd love to talk about. You kind of already touched on it a little bit, but the different ways that even casual sex within friendships could look like, right? Like, what are the different ways of being within this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So are you talking about like how you kind of set it up or
I was thinking more of like when we even start to have these conversations, kind of what are the different setups. So, for example, fuck buddies, to me, that's more emphasis on the fuck than the buddies. But then friends with benefits maybe is more emphasis on the friends than the sex. And so, like, what are some of the different ways that even when we're talking about sex with friends, how does that look?
Yeah, that's a really good and interesting question because I think it can look a lot of ways depending on the friendship, depending on how you're entering the relationship, and where are you? I like to say all the time, like, where are you right now? Right? What are you looking for in this encounter today?
Mm-hmm.
And even though there's already an established friendship, that doesn't mean that we have to come in with assumptions, right? And so some of that can look like, where are you right now? What are you looking for? What do you want to feel like, in other words, in this encounter when
Mm-hmm.
this is over? And that just depends. So I like to kind of say, don't come in with assumptions when you're doing that. The different iterations of that depends, right? It could be friends with benefits, but what does that mean? Be really clear on what are the benefits and how that may affect the friendship. What does it mean to be a fuck buddy? What does it mean to be a sheesh?
What does it mean to have a friendship? What is it?
Friendcest.
Princess? But, I think what you just mentioned around clarifying
Mhm.
expectations, needs, and desires is so important because it's so common for us to just use this language
Yeah.
and not be clear on what we actually want. I can think of so many people who likely had a friends with benefit situation,
Mhm.
but weren't no benefits. They weren't even really
Right,
friends, maybe,
Right.
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so, really being clear
Precise.
on like, what is this relationship going to look like? How are we both going to continue to connect and thrive within it in a way
Hmm.
that feels good for everyone? And so, yeah, I think sometimes we can just use these things and really we just having sex and we
Right.
just calling it something
Right,
else, right?
right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But how do we manage expectations? And if we do have a friendship, what does that mean for our friendship, right? Because again, we talk about how shame comes into it. Sometimes that can enter the bedroom before you even talk about sex, right? So if you're already jumping in from that space, you're probably jumping out, right? Have you ever heard that saying that you can't have sex with your friends?
Yeah.
I think it's great to have sex with your friends, right? Like, but what type of friendship are we talking about?
Yeah.
And if you're thinking, I can't have sex with my friends, where did you learn that? What did you learn about sex? And that normally tells me that there's probably a lack of communication with yourself around it or with the friend.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I know, for me, for years, and I'm kind of in that process of, questioning and challenging, but for years I was definitely of the I don't shit where I eat mentality, right? Like I don't have sex with friends. That's like mixing kind of these different roles of how we, want to box everything into these different categories. And, through my own introspection, recognizing where does that come from, right? And a lot of it is very much so like sex is supposed to be with someone that you're supposed to care about and love and want to be in this romantic relationship with. But like, if you love and care for your friends,
and you want them to have good sex.
Yeah.
Like, I know that we can have great sex together.
Right.
Why can't we share that with one another?
Yeah.
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 I think also something else that's coming up is, and what you mentioned, is the communication. Listen, we don't communicate well. We've talked about it a bunch of times on the podcast, and there's a whole bunch of resources and stuff that just indicates how much of it's a skill that is underdeveloped within our culture, if you will. But I think a lot of people are terrified to cross a boundary that they feel like that has to be in, because they were taught that sex is supposed to be for a romantic, long-term relationship that eventually leads to marriage type of thing. But you always, like, I'm thinking of pop culture and movies and things like that. There's always like this tension, and there's a lack of transparency, and like everyone knows but this person that you like them, and or sometimes on the other hand, there's this experience of, well, were you ever really my friend, or were you just lingering around to see who could have sex? So I think like these hurtful experiences that people have within their friendships and just poor communication make it feel like a really non-ideal situation to create with having sex with friends if we don't have the skills to do it well.
Right. And you really do, you talk about media, you really do see that in queer friendships, right? Especially if you're like interested. I just saw it, I don't know if you saw it, but something with Tyler, the Creator, and a friend.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about that, right? Because one of the things, as you're talking, Rafaela, is about, first of all, being comfortable or setting your own expectations, with the possibility of rejection and what that looks like. Because that's the R word, nobody likes it. It's a strong word. It comes with a strong feeling. But this is your friend, right? So as a friend that someone is saying, hey, I'm interested in entering a sexual relationship with you. What would that look like? If the answer is no, it doesn't have to be a rude no or a harsh no. It can be, right? Like, wow, I'm flattered and I'm not interested. And, here are the reasons. And you can talk about it. But I think with queer friendships, that part around where you always checking for me can also come up, right? Especially if there's any homophobia or internalized homophobia, people can experience that. Saying to your friend, of the same or similar gender, hey, I'm interested in a sexual relationship.
Yeah, and it does require just that transparency and communication, because I've even had that experience where even with some of my cis male friends, and they try to make a move, and I'm just like, yo, like, we're playing basketball. What is that happening? Where is this coming from? And it does feel like, wow, there's some things that I've shared or I've done with you, not knowing that this is maybe your intentions, and then I feel kind of betrayed by that. I think there's a difference when maybe those feelings organically grow over time, but sometimes you can tell, like, nah, I think you were always kind of scouting, you always was like waiting for that moment.
That's true.
They're looking for that love of basketball moment.
Yeah. I'm like, all basketball, no love. And like friendship love.
Right.
Yeah.
But friendship love is important, and I think it can be the foundation of what you're talking about as far as grounding.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And what comes to mind around that too is like having that care, right? Like this is someone that you care about, hopefully, right? In my ideal situation of this, friends, emphasis on the friends piece of, and the sex is added. How do we look at them with care and with love that we have for them, and then letting that lead how we then interact and explore this different part of the relationship that we maybe didn't have before.
Yeah. New
Yeah.
dynamic.
Right.
Yeah. And going over what the concerns may be, right? Because if you haven't deconstructed that narrative, that friend, like you said, you don't shit where you eat, which, yeah, don't do that. That sounds gross. But if you do kind of unpack that and say, well, what will be the pros and cons of this? What are your expectations? Is this a one-time thing? Did you want to have something ongoing? And one of the questions that I don't think that we ask enough is, how would you like for this to end? And that's something that, can be true. I mean, we've kind of been socialized with this happily ever after narrative. But sometimes fuck bunnies, sheesh, fuck bunnies. I like that one. Fuck buddies, the sheesh or the friends with benefit, it's not forever. Right. And so how would you like for this to end? What are some ways that that ending feels, conscious and whole for you?
Oh, that's beautiful. And I feel like we all need that in all of our relationships. This very intentional conversation about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How do we want to grow from it? What's the point here? And if and when it ends, how do we want to handle that? Because I think that's another thing that comes up. People, I don't want to ruin what we have. And we're such great friends, and I don't want sex to make it messy.
Yeah.
I've already heard, valid. Is there a way to mitigate that? Right.
Right.
And if we're saying like we're friends and we don't want to grow into anything else besides a friendship, and then the sex is going to end at some point, that type of intimacy is going to shift at some point. How can we plan for that ahead?
Right.
So
right, because I like the way that Bell Hooks talks about love, and I'm not going to quote it because I can't think of it. But there's one of the things that Bell Hooks says is that we have this idea that love is kind of finite or specific, and that it has to be a certain way, and that it has to be attached to sex, as you were saying earlier. And when that isn't the case, what happens if you and I develop a friends with benefits sexual relationship and I develop deeper emotional connection, right? There's this myth that has to mean that it moves to another escalator, that it moves away. But I can still love you and we can stop having sex if we do that in a way that's conscious, right? If I can still say, I am developing deep feelings for you and I'm probably ready for their sexual relationship to end, but I'd like to maintain a friendship. These feelings may or may not go away. How do you navigate that in a way that's conscious? And I think it can be done very beautifully, but it's not something that we're taught, right? It's something that we have to learn. And so that's really what I love to do.
I love that reminder that it's about the love and the connection, and we all deserve that in every relationship that we have.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not how our society is set up. We don't love our boss and we don't love the director of our organization. But what if we did have that as a value of ours in our society, and how that could shift so much in the way that we engage with one another on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
It's a lofty vision or a goal, but I think it could be really liberating to take the box out of love, or the box that we put love in, to make it very limiting and only familial and romantic and maybe even friendship, but I think it can kind of get a little fuzzy sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. And there's abundance in that. There's not just one type of love or way to love.
And so, I'm thinking as we're talking about all of this, what then does it look like to start to really establish consent and boundaries within this type of relationship, to honor, these different pieces, to make sure that we're keeping in mind expectations, to make sure that we're setting ourselves up as best as possible for this to be a pleasurable experience for everyone involved?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things I like to say is that consent is always today, right? Like right now. And having that open communication is a really big part of that. Starting off with open communication, but then really talking about what consent looks like. What are you consenting to today? Right? What would you like having done to your body or in your mind today?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a big part of it, and having a mutual agreement around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are some common boundaries and yeah, what are some common boundaries that you help people navigate and or create or that you just see come up when you're working with folks coming into therapy and support around this type of thing?
One thing that I see that is really common is kind of this idea that because we're friends, I can have access to you
Mm,
in a certain way now that we've had sex.
mm,
And really helping folks navigate, what it means to talk about mutual agreements, right? Like we said earlier, what are we agreeing to when we enter this sexual relationship? But also having them check into what they're feeling. Like, where's your nervous system at right now? Are you in a deficit? Are you coming from maybe a scarcity mindset? Are you feeling a little bit lonely and desperate? And I don't like that word, but just to air quote it, are you kind of seeking for someone to fill your cup, so to speak? That's really not a space that you want to be operating from when you're trying to meet with someone, because you might be asking them to heal you or fulfill a fantasy that they haven't agreed to. So really setting up your mind body is the best that you can into that conversation with a clear mind. And then what are the mutual agreements that you want to have, right? Is this a one-off? Is this an ongoing thing? And like I said earlier, what are we consenting to? How do we want to begin? How do we want to end? What type of sex are we having, right? What type of sex am I not interested in?
I appreciate you, even that little piece of like, is this a one-time thing or ongoing? Because even in my head, I was like, this is definitely ongoing. Like, if I'm gonna make this happen, this needs to be something that's like, But I think that is a great point of like sometimes there are just these moments of like we want this experience together, and it is just this thing this one time, and so even having that conversation I think is important because you might have people like me being like, oh no, this is something that if we're gonna be friends with benefits, we need to be friends with benefits. But I think that also just speaks to that, right? That importance of the communication.
Right.
And so I think also then, we're talking about all this too. You kind of brought it at the beginning, but how
Mhm.
do we shift, right, from just being a friendship to a friendship that then involves and includes sex?
Mhm. Yeah, it's really through talking about it, right? And saying like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Is this shift something that you're interested in? Laying down some, like you talked about, or feel like some boundaries, maybe some agreements, some foundations around what that looks like. That's how you make this shift, right? You talk about it and you keep talking about it. I think one of the things with friends is that there's the assumption that I know you. And so there's certain things that I don't talk to you about. Because if I'm your friend, I probably know, your other shishas, right? I probably know some of the details of your past relationship, your relational
mm-hmm.
trauma, right? And so how do we navigate that in a way that's, respectful to all that, while also respectful to what our needs are in the moment? So I think shifting into it is really grounded in slowing things down and having a conversation and not rushing into it, because you don't want it to negatively impact your friendship.
Yeah.
That's not the goal.
Yeah, I feel like that rushing in piece is more so what people typically do, right? They
Mm-hmm.
don't take the time to maybe really have these deeper conversations. They might just feel that sexual attraction and jump into it, and then could be a space that we start to see, right, that tension come about. And so I love that piece of, you have the thought of doing it, let's slow it down and have the conversation so that we can, again, right, like really know what we're walking into and what it can mean for the friendship moving forward.
Yeah, and get really deep, get really grounded and get really detailed in it, right? What are your sexual health practices, right? What type of, protections or barriers do you like to use? What type of lube do you like to use? What type of toys do you like to use? Do you not like to use toys? How much get really specific, right? Because it is something that, at least with the friendship that you have, I'm assuming that you have some level of communication. And so you can really deepen that with the friend if you want to go there.
Yeah. And not taking that relationship for granted, right?
Right. Right. And talk about that. Like, and I also would think about, even if you did rush into it, because, been there, done that. How do we communicate taking a step back and checking in with yourself? Ooh, that was really great. Or here's some things that I loved, and here's some things that I'd like for us to do next time, right? Brushing up on your consent education, right? We can never do enough of that. And respecting your friends' autonomy, respecting your friends that may need space to process, and allowing yourself to have that as well.
I'm just having different visuals going through my head, like scenarios of people practicing kissing with their friends, or it's just like so many things we want to try. Or like,
right.
I say I have a friend who does shibari or something like that, which I do, and I have really good friends who play with me, and we have this conversation and we communicate very well around what's happening here, as opposed to me, like, I gotta find this dungeon, I gotta find this person on FetLife, and I don't want to do all of that, but my homie knows how to do this thing, and I know we can play together and have these conversations, and also it just feels better because but I think that could just be such a beautiful experience where people are wanting to step out, learn new things, or if they've never done anything, but wow, maybe my friend can hold space for that, and we can create this dynamic of sexual exploration together, instead of all this pressure with this stranger that I don't know, and I have to do all of this. Like, eventually, yes, we have to get there, but I think it could be so fun to do that with friends.
Yeah. I'm hoping that in your friendships, you listeners have some emotional safety as well, right? I think like who you can do that with and maybe who you don't, but establishing that really lead to a really beautiful experience. And I think slowing things down can really lead to a really beautiful experience too.
Yeah. Always. We need a lot more slowness and intentionality. And there are so many examples where people, maybe they drank too much, or they were just in this really intimate space and they started kissing and making out, and the next thing you know, have sex, and it's like, oh my God, that's my friend. What do we do?
Oops.
But being able to say, okay, this thing happened, let's talk about it.
Right.
Also not jump into conclusions about, did we have these feelings deep down that are coming out? Maybe not, but let's talk about it. And then figuring out, actually, we like that. We want to do more of that together. Or, whatever conversations need to happen, being open to have them instead of kind of avoiding and retreating away from it.
Or jumping right to shame, right? And, that's another thing to keep in mind when there are substances involved, right? It changes your brain. So you might feel that dump from the alcohol, and that dump might be like, oh no, so giving yourself time, right? Giving yourself time and trusting the mutual respect and adoration that you and your friend have.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, with that, let's take our first break, and we'll see you in a bit.
All right.
All righty.
And welcome back. So I would love us to move into talking a bit about, we're starting to, have this relationship with our friends that's turned sexual. We've already kind of hit on like when other feelings might come up or perceived feelings might come up. And so we'd love to talk about like, how do those lines potentially get blurred between friendship and romance when you start to have sex with someone?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I think the way that we are taught about sex inherently is about how sacred it is and how, you know, you need to really know and you need to be really cautious and it means really big things, and not to discount any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it makes it hard for people to fathom the idea of casual sex with a friend shouldn't or can't advance to something else. Like, there's just this assumption that if you have sex with someone long enough, at some point big feelings will come, and then what? Like, there's no way to prevent it. And what I'm hearing you say earlier is like, yeah, big feelings may come up, but still doesn't mean that we want or should want a long-term romantic relationship.
Right.
That, yeah. So that's something that was coming up. It's like why I think it's so easy for the lines to get blurred is this assumption that sex should be this. It should lead to that at some point. But what are your thoughts?
Right. I think we're talking about like misaligned expectations, right? Like, and what does it mean to be romantic? I am a what does it mean person. Like, what do you mean? Like, if you are saying like, oh, we're having sex and it's turning romantic, is there some kind of narrative that I'm attaching to that, right? Let's say we friends with benefits and, you know, I'm having a romantic feeling, so let's go out to dinner or something like that. What does that mean? What does that lead to? I do think it's important to kind of have that conversation. You know, are you feeling more right now? Does this need to lead to something for you? Or is there any discomfort and ease in the fact that we've had sex and now you feel it that I'm expecting you to feel some type of role in my life, right? Or to provide these kind of romantic gestures. Now, there's no problem with friends being romantic, like we talked about, without sex, right? But where's it coming from for you? If it starts to go down that road, is there something that we need to talk about? And that doesn't mean, you know, in this way of like, hey, we need to talk, right? But more in an open-hearted way, in a soft way, right? I'm okay with us exchanging gifts or having romantic gestures. But is there any other meaning that this means for you, right? Are we talking about a relationship escalator at this point?
Yeah. I was thinking about in a previous episode, I talked about my own experience with the romanticism, if you will, and how I can have feelings of romance towards my friends. And that be it. Like, I just like to dote on people. I like to surprise them. I like to exchange gifts. I like, you know, to just, yeah, to me, that's romantic energy. And I don't reserve that for just my sexual, romantic, long-term partners. And now I'm thinking about the sexual component because I don't have that. And I'm just like, I just want to be romantic. Okay. I don't want sex from you. But I think because we are taught and told what certain types of attraction and behavior should lead to, it does feel blurry of like, okay, well, if I feel this way, then does that mean we should be this? And, you know, having that reminder, it's our job to dive down into that and really unblur the lines for ourselves before we start engaging with other folks and it gets blurry, and or admit like, okay, things have shifted and I have to do some work around figuring it out, because I know you told me you're not in, you know, you've told me what the lines are,
right?
And I'm not going to project that onto you or make that something you have to figure out for me. Like, that's my responsibility to figure it out and then come back and see if we can renegotiate something, or maybe we end the sexual component of our relationship because I'm in a different place. There's a lot of responsibility here that's also not specific to casual sex. It's specific to all of our relationships. But I think we learn to oil that tool in specific dynamics and not others.
I think you're right. I think it is like what you're starting to go down a road and it means something to me and it may mean something different to you. And I too enjoy gifts and gift giving. I'm really big with that with friends. And I'm the type of person, I don't need it. It doesn't have to be, we were saying earlier, transactional, right? It's something that I enjoy doing. And, you know, outside of a sexual relationship, if I have a new friendship and I'm starting to do this gift giving, they might assume, oh, you want the goods, you're into it, right?
You trying to butter me up.
And then we have to bag it up. Because what I may have done is not communicated. Hey, I'm a really big gift giver when it comes to friendships. I really love to dote on my friends and, spoil them. But it doesn't come from a space of, sexual interest or anything like that. Right.
Yeah.
And if
Or the
that's something that we're
sensations.
interested in,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it just goes back to just all these coded messages of
Mm,
even behaviors have like this idea of, well, if you do this, then obviously it means you want this.
Mm-hmm.
And even, another thought I was thinking of is, within the friendship, maybe you're doing things before that was very similar to what you did after you started having sex together, but the simple act of starting to have sex together might also lead you to start to see those behaviors in a different light. And
yep.
right, and so it's just this really weird kind of trickery that we've been given of like, there's only one way, one road this will lead down, right? And then
Right.
there isn't this other possibilities that are open to us.
Right. And for those people that are socialized in the feminine, right,
Mm.
there is this part of that socialization that comes with an entitlement, actually, right? We use language like smash, give it up, hit, all these language. And that comes with like, if I do this with you, then you owe me that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that story is not just dinner, but now we walking down the aisle, right? So there's introducing to friends. If you have a friend, maybe they've already been introduced to your family, right? So there's all these coded messages when it comes to sex, when it comes to friendship. What does that mean?
I think because of this transactional piece, people tend to believe like, oh, because someone did something for me, then I owe them something. And sometimes that thing that you feel you may owe is sex. And maybe that other person thinks so, or maybe it's just in my head. But I think that's another reason why it makes it so hard. And we have to recognize, we have to detangle these messages and these expectations that we get to say where this road goes. It does not have to be this predetermined thing that society or friends or movies or music has set for us. We really have to feel empowered to make our own rules and to challenge everything that we've been taught and witnessed already.
Absolutely. And I think you were talking about earlier that the tropes in movies and rom-coms and all these other things and how we feel obligated to follow that as well. Right. And it can mess with your self-esteem if you've aligned yourself with that narrative.
Yeah, the friends to lovers trope is it runs deep. And I think it even can speak to what we were talking about earlier. Even when you're deciding to go into a sexual relationship with a friend, it might be in the back of your head of like, well, this is on that track, right, of the friends to lovers trope. We're starting here now, but in the end, we'll end up at this place, which I think just continues to blur kind of what we conceive around all of this.
Yeah, and also because, we're taught like you want your long-term partner to be your friend, and I think people maybe start like, oh, this is a good thing. Like, we're having sex, we have really good friendship. This could be my person. And there has been no communication about that. I think on the flip side, as a relationship therapist and people, well, just as a therapist in general, people in relationships and like, well, we can still be friends. And I'm just like, but were y'all friends though?
Well, were
Because
you friends in the first place?
you're telling me how they disrespected you. You're telling me all these things. So if you take out the sex and the living together and all this other stuff, what's left? It doesn't really sound like a loving friendship to me. So what are we really holding on to?
Right. No, I was saying that's why you want to think about the foundation. Is there mutual respect and adoration? What is the language that you know that you need for that foundation of a friendship?
So with that, like how then do we really nurture, right, that friendship and also the sexual relationship, right? Because in my head, they're with the same person, but I do think that they can operate a little bit differently, right? Like, so how do we work to nurture both of these things? Yeah.
Are you saying nurture so well, the friendship is established, but now that we've had sex, we need to nurture the sexual relationship and the friendship?
Yeah. Yeah. How do we kind of keep that in mind, right? Like if we're thinking about some of those boundaries, we're thinking about not wanting to blur those lines, like how do we then work to nurture these two aspects of the relationship that we have with that person?
Yeah, it's still, I mean, it really goes back to communication. And I think we can say communication, 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 but it really does start with checking in with yourself, right? Like I said earlier, where are you operating from when you want to have this conversation? The friendship is already established, and you've talked about entering a sexual relationship. You want to talk about what that looks like. Like we can talk about in, the BDSM kink community about aftercare, right? Is that something that you need? But even before care, right? Like, what do you need? What do we need to talk about? What is the set and setting that you want to have in our time together? And then how do you want it to be nurtured? Because you might have, these kind of mixed attachment styles, right? One person might be dismissive. One person might be operating from the space of avoidance. How do you navigate that if you're an anxious person, right? And so really having those conversations is going to be really important. And also, I like to have ways that you can check in, right, with each other regularly that doesn't feel like it's burdening the relationship. Right. So that might be if you're texting, right? Maybe you're sending memes, maybe you're kind of spent with social interaction, but you're answering text with like a thumbs up or a heart or just a few words of like, hey, I'm not in the space. I don't have a lot of social energy right now, but I'm willing to talk to you, or I would love to talk to you, later tonight or tomorrow. But checking in with each other, especially ahead of time to kind of set up how you want to do that, I think it's a really important piece.
Yeah, I think what's coming to mind now when you were talking about that is the attachment piece of like, because honestly, when you say the piece around if you're texting like, oh, I just don't have the social energy right now, I know there's some people out there who get that and they might spiral, right? Of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, what does this mean?
Yep.
Oh, they hate me. Oh, I messed up. We should never done this. All these things that just come into our heads when our own perceptions of what is going on might not actually line up with reality. But yeah, but I think that is such a big thing to be aware of. And that introspective piece is to know, like, what is it that can be activating for you within relationships, right? Like, what are the
Right.
things in your past that you might be holding on to that could show up within this relationship? And how do we work to manage that, right? How do we work to care for ourselves in those moments to make sure that they're not going to negatively impact what we have either with the friendship or the sexual relationship that's occurring?
Right. And I think that's why it's important, like when we started, what do you want? How do you want to feel when this interaction is over? Right? Because if I know that you want like this extra care, or maybe you would like an extended aftercare situation and I don't have the capacity for it, then I can say that in the beginning, right? Then this may not be a good idea, right? Or I can say that's something that I really enjoy, really love, and I'd like to be able to do that for you. But maybe we should schedule this for another time when I do have the energy to do that. So really keeping those lines of communication open.
Yeah.
And I think so much of it is just also giving ourselves permission to change our minds while also respecting that everyone else's minds won't change. So we can start off with, when we're setting these expectations, you can say, all right, this is the plan, but also things might change, but that does not mean that you should feel forced to change anything. But I would like to know that we can have an open communication or open conversation about how I'm feeling and what's shifted for me, and then what does that mean for the future? Because I think we tend to hold this stuff in, like, oh, we said we're going to do this, this, and that. Now I want to do this, that, and this.
Mhm.
And now things are awkward because I'm not speaking up about how things have shifted for me. So that should be part of the groundwork as well. As things may change, and also doesn't mean that anyone's obligated to do anything with those feelings and emotions, or that may be a sign to end if it feels like it's overwhelming for me, or maybe I need to talk to someone else and process and figure it all out. But I think that's the thing that makes it hard. It's just like, it feels this expectation that it's rigid when it really should be flexible, at least in the communication of the shifts with us mentally, emotionally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how much flexibility do you know of yourself of having,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because for everyone at any given time, it might not be the best idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I said earlier, if you're coming from a space of, I haven't had sex in a while, whatever that means for you, and I just really want to need that. Maybe you're having a fantasy of what this person can fulfill for you
Mm-hmm.
without without them consenting to it, actually,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm.
Yeah. That's a big piece. I often talk to folks, maybe clients or whomever, who have big feelings for someone, and they kind of create this whole vision of how it's going to go, and that I
Yeah.
just need to confess my love or whatever. And it's just like, they don't owe you anything.
Mm-mm.
And people get caught up into this feeling of entitlement, of feeling because I believe this or feel this, and I let them know that everything's going to work out the way that I envisioned it. And that's just not the case. But also, we need to create a relationship in which I can be vulnerable to tell you these things without being shamed or made fun of or embarrassed or been like, what the hell would you think was going to happen? Something like that. And to be met with care while also knowing that this person can lovingly decline,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And, like you said, that R word, rejection, we have to reframe that as well. It's a decline. It's a lack of interest. It's not you being rejected. It's this one thing that you put on the table. I'm saying I'm not interested in, but I'm not rejecting you as a
Right.
person. So I think that's something that we often have to work through as well.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's a really significant piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm rejecting the idea of this, I'm rejecting this activity or this interaction, not you, the whole person. I think that's important and can be
Yeah.
done with a deep level of care.
Yeah, because when we're having these hard conversations, again, we are learning this together more than likely because we have not witnessed it, we have not often experienced it done well, and we just have to give ourselves that grace and compassion to know that we are going to mess up, but we're making a commitment to one another, to myself, and to
Mhm.
one another, or whoever is all involved, that we are going to work to repair, but we want to be transparent and honest in this relationship. It's going to make it hard,
mm-hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's remembering like there's someone else involved too, right? So with that, let's take another break and we'll come back to start to talk about how then do we navigate some of those difficult conversations and pieces. Okay. And we're back. So, we were just wanting to dig in more to when we have these experiences, when we're, navigating the friendship and the sexual relationship, and we're experiencing these feelings and expectations that might shift and change. How do we start to navigate these conversations? I know we talked about communication, but what does it look like to have the conversations that feel really uncomfortable or that feel maybe even impossible to have because we're, again, in our own heads about it. We've created some ideas of what this should be and look like, and we maybe don't have those tools to be able to have that ongoing process to check in. So how do people start to navigate some of those pieces?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it's really going to be starting with this self-awareness practice, right? Checking in with yourself, getting a vocabulary around your feelings, around what sensations that you have, what your activation points are, or AKA triggers are, when you're having these conversations, right? It's really starting with you because to Rafaela's point, you know, the other person isn't necessarily responsible, right? Or they don't have to, right, agree to this. And so you may hear something that you don't want to hear. And so preparing yourself for that too. But it really starts with checking in and building your emotional intelligence and emotional complexity. Earlier, we used that word rigid, right?
Right.
And so being willing to check in with yourself so you can start to have vocabulary about what you're feeling, what you want to talk about, and also being able to hear and listen to your friend's language around what they're feeling and what the expectations might be.
And
We're getting
listen.
really clear on that.
Getting clear on it, listening to it honestly,
Mm.
and like believing it. Sometimes I
Believing
think
it.
sometimes we like, oh well, if I just do this well enough,
Yeah.
if we do that well enough, they'll change their
Mhm.
mind or
Mm.
whatever the case is. So we need
Yes.
to
Yeah.
just honor people's truths
Mhm.
and operate from wherever is landing in that
Yeah.
moment. And so really essentially, if there's anyone wanting a more clear direct answer, it's just you have to prepare, you have to be honest and upfront when we're talking about the groundwork. You have to do it. You have to
Mhm.
sit down and say, hey, we're getting ready to, shift this relationship from just friends to adding sex. And with that may come a time where we have to have a difficult conversation. How do we want to do that? So how do we actually put that on the table as well as something
Yeah.
to potentially navigate? How do we talk about hard things when they come up?
Yeah.
Because they might, right? And so there's so many
Right.
different pieces of preparation that we have to keep in mind. That's not just, when do we break up? But it's like, how do we continue to set boundaries and expectations on navigating this relationship?
Right. And it's an ongoing conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do you think this will impact this friendship?
Yeah.
Right.
What are your fears? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your desires? And even again, maybe on different pages, but I think it's still beautiful to know that
Yeah.
about the person. Like, oh, that's something you really value. Learn something new about you. And also, I don't care about that.
Yeah. And I think,
Right.
what you're saying that too, for me is also the beautiful thing of like sex with friends and what it could be is that it can just deepen that relationship, right? It can allow you to know this person in a different way that for me could reinforce the love for them as a friend too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think goes back to this idea of sex. You were even saying like, right, this idea of like sex is sacred, which I agree. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at sex, but if you are someone who,
I think there's a lot of different ways to look at sacred too.
yes,
Sacred too.
exactly. And that's what I'm thinking is if you're someone who has that feelings about it, it can still be that with that friend. It can still be special. It can still be sacred. It can still fuel something in you that feels, that capacity for that need is just in a different context than maybe you initially thought it would be in. And so how can we look at it that way and reframe for ourselves that this is still something that's special. This is still something that, is giving me connection with a person that I care about, that I love about,
I think that goes to the conversations I'm hearing a lot more now around casual sex. It's like,
Right.
it's casual sex, but we're not treating people casually or
Yes.
disregarding them as
Mhm.
not being worthy or just like
Yes.
treating them poorly,
Mhm.
And so it can be, we can have sacred friend sex or however you want
Yes.
to call it. That's respectful, loving, full of curiosity and exploration,
Yeah.
that has boundaries and clear expectations and goals. And that type of thing isn't limited to the person that we envision moving in with or marrying or anything like that.
Right. And I think when, even like you said earlier, even if you have had these conversations around exploration and experimentation and boundaries and mutual agreements, be willing and open to revisit that and maybe often, right? As often as you need to, because it can deepen your friendship. But I think one of the things that's not talked about with casual sex when it's done in this way is that it can deepen your relationship with yourself, right? It
Yeah.
can deepen your sexual vocabulary around what you need. It can deepen your spiritual and sacred sexual relationship with yourself as well. And that doesn't mean that it has to be all rainbows and sunshine. Sometimes even going through shit, right, helps deepen your relationship with yourself, helps you build vocabulary on how to navigate rejection, on how to navigate breaking up, on how to navigate uncoupling, or going from a friends to benefits relationships to now navigating coming out of the sexual relationships and remaining friends.
Yeah.
I love that you said that because that leads me to my next thought is what are maybe some of those signs that help us identify, on this journey with this friend where it does lead to, right? Does it lead to, like we were saying, this, relationship escalator where we wind up, becoming romantic partners? Does it lead to this ending, right? And how do we start to maybe identify what that is?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's complicated in the sense of, you have two people here. And so that's why
Hmm.
I'm saying that you keep constantly talking about it. But some of those signs are that you've talked about it, right? And you've agreed to move it into a certain direction, whether that's moving it forward or moving it away. And what does that look like? If you've already established this friendship around, okay, I'm already, like, for example, we talked about gift giving. I'm already having these romantic gestures with you, and that's deepening. But I'm noticing that that's deepening the way that I'm feeling towards you. Then you really want to talk about how does that impact your friendship, right? What are some ways? What are some social repercussions, right? Are we talking about
Hmm.
that we're fucking to our friends, right? So we want
Hmm.
to navigate and unpack what that means in our social setting. How are we going to navigate miscommunications and misunderstandings when they arise if they get hurt? So, how do we want to take those steps forward? All those things can line up to either taking those steps forwards or backwards. That's how I see it. So, yeah, really navigating the space around what does it mean for me to be in a relationship escalated with you, and what part of the escalator are we on? Because just because you've taken a step to say, okay, let's do more of this or let's open it up to something else, that doesn't mean that we're going to go on to marriage or happily ever after. But what does it mean? What does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need from you? Right? I mean, some friends are talking to each other already every single day, right? Some friends
Hmm.
don't speak that often, but they're having sex maybe more often than they are, in like daily communication. Does that need to change? If so, why? If
Mm-hmm.
not, why not?
Yeah, I think the major thing that sticks out to me usually is around the clarity. The sign that you're receiving is not really a sign for anything unless
Mhm.
the two of you agreed on it. Like, I can't
Yeah.
say, oh, we've been texting more, we've been going out to eat, so that must mean that this is. No, it only means something if it means something to everyone. So we have
Hmm.
to be really
Mhm.
clear to not throw those things in there and make assumptions based on our emotions and feelings if we haven't checked in with the person. The other person could just be thinking, like, oh, we're just casually like going out more and talking more, but we're still friends with benefits, and I don't have a interest or a drive or desire for it to turn into anything more. So
Yeah.
I think it's just really, really important. We tend to get information and want to change the narrative, or we create these
Mhm.
narratives, but we're not checking in with the other person that's part of the story.
Yes.
So
Right, absolutely.
like you just now
We're not
you're the
checking
director, you're the lead
Right.
actor, you're the producer. What happened to the co-star? Just
You're
And
nothing.
writing their lines
sometimes
for them.
checking in is the scary thing, right? If
Mhm.
that person
Yeah.
isn't checking in, you want to think about why. You're starting to have these feelings and you're
Mhm.
not checking in and saying, oh my gosh, she looks so good. And I really want to do all these things with you. And I want to escalate this relationship, but I'm scared,
Mhm.
right? I'm afraid that you might not want that. And so you haven't communicated. And so what are you setting yourself up for when you do that?
Mm.
Disappointment and heart crushing conversation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
So you're going to hurt either way.
you're going to
Yeah.
hurt either way. Yeah.
So then,
Hmm.
this is kind of my final thought is when you're that potential of maybe being hurt, right? How do we care for ourselves when we are, engaging in this particular type of relationship? How do we make sure that we are checking in with ourselves, and what does that look like, right? Because again, right, if we're the director, the producer, the writer, we're creating all these narratives in our head that can lead to some really heavy feelings that could be,
Disillusion. Like
yeah,
people are
yeah,
disillusioned.
just thank you. That can lead to some disillusionment, and so like, how do we care for ourselves in those moments?
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that you need to have community, right? It's not
Mhm.
you can't just always rely on you. Because I mean, I sex gets stuff pumping in the body and the brain. We have all these juicy, fun, nice chemicals. And so does love, right? And so sometimes it's you can't just rely on you. You're like, I think that she really does love me, right? Because you're all in your own head. So have someone to talk to, right? Friends are one area to talk to, but you can also hire a therapist or a coach or have an outside person to kind of discuss it with. Hey, where am I going with this? And then, like we said earlier, you do want to talk to the person, your friend that you're working with, or that you're having a sexual relationship with. And you can journal, you can check in on how you feel after these encounters, right? You can give yourself time and space to just sit with those feelings and figure out, is this something that you're kind of pushing forward because you feel good in the moment, right? Or is it something that you really have felt for a while and you just haven't spoken to?
Mm-hmm. And I just love the call to remind people to set up check-ins. I think relationship check-ins for all the relationships are great. We do it at work, right? I have an annual review with my employees.
Yes.
I have check-ins with my partners. Me and my
Yep.
business partner, we meet on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's make that a thing where we're just not waiting until everything is getting ready to erupt with a lot of those strong, tense emotions, and just set something where on some type of consistent basis we're having this conversation. It could be aftercare related every time, or it could be monthly, or whatever the case is. But how can we show the care that we do have for one another and this relationship by intentionally checking in with one another?
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think if you're not checking in, especially in a sexual relationship, then how do they know what your needs and wants and desires are too? Right.
Right.
How do they know where you are, what you're feeling? And sometimes getting it out from your head and your heart, speaking it, can help you unpack what you're really feeling.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Or we have to get things out of our head and just say it out loud or write it. It hits differently, and you can start to process a little bit more when it's not just all up here in your head.
Absolutely.
Say it out loud.
Yeah.
One thing I like to say is that if we're not cultivating communication and openness and being able to explore in these sexual relationships, then we're just having somebody masturbate with our bodies and not consensually, right? And if you're not in it, you're just there. So if you don't know how to communicate, if you haven't learned how to, find someone, hire a coach, listen to podcasts, but find and learn ways to communicate what your needs are, because that's going to be really important if you're trying to navigate casual sexual relationships and friends with benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can listen to this podcast and this episode.
Share it.
Yeah.
And share it.
Before you get into that friends with benefits situation,
Yes.
like, let me just,
Uh-huh.
instead of a meme today, I'm going to send a link to this podcast.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for all of that, Kaya. In terms of resources this week, so Kaya, I don't know if you know, we work to create worksheets every episode for people so they can have further engagement and have some of that time to introspect, right, that we've been talking about. So I'm definitely thinking it could be helpful to start to outline, right, what does it look like to have these conversations, maybe giving some templates of questions to think about for them and their friend, and then definitely some of that introspective pieces that people can really spend some time to help slow it down a little bit before they jump into this. So yeah, and then with that, as we come to the end, do you have any final thoughts or advice for our listeners, Kaya?
Yes. Know where you're starting from, right? Think about, what do I have a need for in this moment at this time in my life if I want to start a casual sexual relationship or having sex with my friend. And if you can't figure that out, journal, talk to a friend, but communicate. I know we said that a lot, but I cannot overstate how important it is to keep the conversation open with yourself and with your friends so that you can have a wonderful, amazing, sexy experience.
Beautiful.
Love it. Well, thank you again for joining us and talking all things sex with friends. Is there anything you'd like to promote, and where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at Infinite Zen Therapy on Instagram and Facebook. I'm not a TikToker yet, but do Kaya Spicer on LinkedIn if you want to find me there. And yeah, let's stay connected. I'm happy to hear from folks.
Awesome. Well, listeners, thanks again for a great episode. You can come back next week as we talk about the taboos of cheating.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And you can follow us at Soft Landing Podcast on Instagram and check us out at healingexchange.com/podcast, where you can get the worksheet in addition to everything else that we have. So please remember to rate and subscribe to us on Spotify and send us those questions so that we can respond to them with our guests. Have a great week and go kiss the homies.
Yes.